The day started like any other, but for a young woman named Emily, it was going to be different. She walked toward the gun store with a mix of excitement and nervousness. The streets were busy, and the autumn sunlight reflected off the glass windows, making her heartbeat a little faster. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, researching, practicing at a small range, and learning everything she could about firearms. Yet, as she approached the entrance, a small knot of doubt tried to creep in. Will they take me seriously? She wondered. Pushing the thought aside, Emily stepped into the store. The moment she crossed the threshold, the atmosphere changed. The smell of gun oil, polished wood, and leather greeted her, along with the soft sound of someone testing a firearm at the far end of the range. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. People looked up as she entered. Some glanced curiously. Others barely hid their amusement. Emily noticed the skeptical stares of men who were obviously used to being the center of attention in a place like this. They saw a young woman, dressed casually, and immediately assumed she was inexperienced, perhaps even fragile. The first few steps she took toward the counter felt heavier than usual. She could feel their eyes on her, weighing her, silently judging. "Here we go," one man whispered to his friend. "Let's see what she's made of." Emily didn't respond, didn't even flinch. She reminded herself that she wasn't here to prove anything to them. She was here for herself, to learn, to grow, and to challenge herself. But still, the looks made her determined to show them that she belonged. As she reached the counter, Emily greeted the clerk with a polite smile and asked a question about the type of firearms they carried. She used the correct terminology, showing she had done her research. "Do you have any semi-automatic rifles suited for someone with moderate experience?" she asked, her voice steady, confident, yet calm. A few heads turned, some in surprise. Most of the men had expected her to ask something vague or display ignorance. Instead, she sounded knowledgeable, almost professional. The clerk raised an eyebrow, slightly impressed, but the customers around her were not convinced. Whispers started again. "She's just pretending," someone muttered. "She won't last 5 minutes handling a real gun," said another. Emily could feel the mockery, but she ignored it. She didn't argue, didn't defend herself. She knew that actions spoke louder than words, and soon, she would have a chance to show everyone what she could do. Emily walked slowly through the aisles, her fingers lightly brushing the polished stocks of rifles and shotguns displayed on the racks. She admired their craftsmanship, the sleek metal, the balance of each piece. Each weapon seemed to call out to her, challenging her to prove she could handle it. She picked up a medium-sized rifle, checking its weight, the feel of the trigger, and the sight. The men watching her from across the store leaned in slightly, curiosity mixed with disbelief. They were used to seeing men handle firearms, to seeing confident hands gripping the stock. A young woman handling one so naturally was not something they had anticipated. Emily didn't let their doubts affect her. She focused on what she knew, on her breathing, and on the basics she had practiced repeatedly. She knew that nerves could make even experienced shooters falter, but she felt a calm determination inside her. She had trained for this moment in her mind many times. How she would walk in, how she would approach the counter, and how she would handle the reactions of those around her. Now it was real. As she approached the counter again, she asked to see a specific rifle she had been researching. The clerk hesitated for a moment, clearly surprised by her knowledge and interest. Emily noticed a few of the men exchange glances, their whispers fading into silence. Something was changing. They were beginning to see that this young woman was not here for show. She was serious, prepared, and ready to handle whatever challenge the store had to offer. The moment was small but significant. Emily's confidence had already begun to shift the atmosphere. People who had been laughing, whispering, or sneering now watched her more closely, curious about what she would do next. She didn't need their approval, but the change in energy around her was undeniable. This was her first victory, walking into a place full of doubt and judgment and holding her ground with dignity and composure. By the time she selected the rifle she wanted to try, Emily felt a surge of excitement. She knew this was only the beginning. The real challenge, the one that would truly test her skill and courage, was about to come. But for now, she stood tall, steady, and unshaken, ready to take the next step. The mockery around her had not disappeared entirely, but it no longer intimidated her. In that moment, she realized that confidence, knowledge, and calm determination could speak louder than any words of doubt. And so, with a steady hand and a determined heart, Emily prepared to show the world that she was not to be underestimated. If you want, I can continue part 2 in the same style, keeping it simple, engaging, and around 800 words, so the story is ready for a full 8-part YouTube series. Emily had just chosen the rifle she wanted to try, and for a brief moment, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. But the calm determination she carried into the store did not waver. She approached the counter with purpose, ready to ask the clerk to help her get started. That's when the whispers and stares from the other customers began to grow louder. Some leaned against the racks with smirks, while others chuckled under their breath. "She thinks she can handle that?" one man whispered, shaking his head. "She has no idea what she's doing." Another man snorted. "I bet she can't even load it properly. Watch this." Emily overheard them, but she didn't react. She had learned early that responding to mockery only gave it power. She kept her voice steady as she asked the clerk for guidance on how to properly handle the rifle. She wanted to make sure she followed all safety rules perfectly, showing that she respected the weapon and the process. The clerk, though a bit skeptical at first, decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. "All right, we can do this. Let's go to the practice area," he said. Emily nodded and followed him, her movements calm and deliberate. The men who had been mocking her exchanged amused glances, clearly expecting her to fail. They whispered to each other about how funny it would be to see her stumble or make a mistake. Once they reached the practice area, Emily carefully unloaded the rifle from the display. She checked the safety, the magazine, and the sight, doing everything correctly step by step. Every move she made was deliberate and precise, showing that she had studied and practiced. She felt the eyes of the skeptics on her, but she didn't let it distract her. Instead, she focused on the rifle, on her stance, and on her breathing. A few of the men leaned closer, murmuring among themselves. "She looks like she knows what she's doing, but can she actually shoot?" one asked quietly. Emily raised the rifle, adjusting her grip and stance exactly as she had practiced countless times before. She aimed at the target, took a deep breath, and slowly squeezed the trigger. The first shot rang out sharply, hitting the target almost perfectly. A few of the mockers froze, their surprise evident. Emily didn't smile or celebrate. She simply readied herself for the next shot, staying focused. She fired again and again, each shot landing closer and closer to the bullseye. The whispers that had been mocking her earlier turned into quiet murmurs of disbelief. People began to realize that she was not just lucky. She clearly had skill and knowledge that matched, or even surpassed, their expectations. One particularly loud man couldn't help himself. "That's impossible," he muttered, shaking his head. "No girl that young can shoot like that." Emily didn't respond. She had learned that proving herself didn't require words. Her actions spoke louder than any argument she could make. Each successful shot reinforced her confidence, while the mockers' disbelief began to build into genuine curiosity. Some even started to lean in, watching her carefully, trying to understand how she was doing it. After a few more rounds, Emily lowered the rifle and took a step back. Her breathing was steady, and her hands were firm. She had completed the demonstration flawlessly. The clerk gave her a small nod of approval, clearly impressed by her skill. Some of the skeptics in the room, however, still wore doubtful expressions, unwilling to admit what they had just witnessed. One man, more arrogant than the rest, stepped forward and smirked. "All right, that's fine for now. But can you handle a challenge?" he asked, clearly intending to provoke her. "I've been handling guns for decades. Let's see if you can really shoot under pressure." Emily looked at him calmly. She could feel the tension in the air, the challenge hanging between them. But she didn't hesitate. "I'm ready," she said simply. There was no arrogance in her tone, just confidence backed by preparation and skill. The man laughed loudly, drawing attention from everyone around. You'll see. You're going to fail. He gestured to a more difficult target downrange, further away than the previous ones. Emily nodded and stepped forward, taking a careful aim. Her focus was absolute. She blocked out the jeers and whispers completely. This was no longer about proving them wrong. It was about proving to herself what she could do. She fired the first shot, hitting the target with precision. Then the second, the third, each landing exactly where she intended. The room went quiet. Even the loudest skeptics stopped laughing. They were watching something unexpected. A young woman, calm and focused, performing at a level they had assumed only experienced men could achieve. A few people whispered to each other, starting to question their assumptions. Maybe we judged her too quickly, one admitted. She really does know what she's doing. Emily felt a small, private satisfaction. She had not only handled the rifle flawlessly but also begun to turn the room in her favor. Her quiet confidence and unwavering focus were starting to earn respect, even if the mockers were slow to admit it. She didn't gloat, didn't boast. She simply continued her demonstration, letting her actions speak louder than any words. By the end of her practice, Emily had completely proved one thing. Skill and determination are not limited by age, gender, or appearance. Those who mocked her had been forced to reconsider their assumptions, and though some still whispered doubts, a seed of respect had been planted. Emily left the practice area with her head held high, ready for whatever challenge would come next. After proving herself with the initial shots, Emily felt a surge of confidence. The earlier whispers and laughter from the crowd had quieted, replaced by curious eyes and hesitant admiration. But she knew this was only the beginning. She could sense that some people still doubted her. They had seen her handle the rifle, yes, but could she truly demonstrate the full extent of her skill? Could she handle more challenging targets, and more importantly, could she do it under pressure? The man who had openly mocked her earlier stepped forward again. His smirk had faded into something closer to surprise, though he still tried to act confident. "All right," he said, his voice dripping with challenge. "Let's see if you can hit targets that actually test your aim. Close was easy. Let's see if you can handle the real deal." Emily nodded calmly, her focus unshaken. She was used to challenges. She had spent hours at the range practicing her aim, learning how to steady her breathing and control her pulse. Each movement had become second nature, and now it was time to show that it wasn't luck that got her those first perfect shots. It was skill. The clerk brought over a set of more difficult targets. These were smaller, placed further apart, and positioned at awkward angles that required precision and patience. The distance alone would have intimidated many seasoned shooters, but Emily remained calm. She adjusted her stance, planting her feet firmly and lining up her sights carefully. Each step she took, each adjustment she made was deliberate, showing a level of control that immediately drew the attention of everyone in the store. "All right, let's see it," someone muttered from the back, unable to hide their curiosity. The mocker who had challenged her earlier watched closely, leaning forward slightly as if he didn't quite believe what he was about to witness. Emily raised the rifle and took her first careful shot. The bullet hit the target dead center, causing a quiet gasp to ripple through the onlookers. She didn't rush. She stayed calm, controlled, and deliberate. Each shot that followed landed precisely where she intended, one after the other. The crowd, which had been skeptical moments ago, began to whisper among themselves, their doubts slowly turning into awe. A few men exchanged nervous glances. I didn't expect her to be this good," one admitted quietly. "She's precise." Emily ignored the murmurs and focused entirely on the targets. She knew the mockery wasn't completely gone. She could still feel a few doubtful stares, but she didn't let it distract her. Every action, every shot, was her statement. Skill and confidence don't depend on age or appearance. They depend on preparation, focus, and determination. Then came the ultimate test. One of the targets was smaller than the others, placed at an awkward angle that required her to adjust her stance and balance perfectly. The man who had doubted her most laughed nervously. "This one's impossible," he said. "Even I have trouble hitting it sometimes." Emily took a deep breath. She visualized the shot, adjusted her grip, and slowly aimed. She remembered the countless hours she had spent practicing, the lessons she had learned about patience, precision, and focus. Then she squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck the target perfectly. A collective gasp filled the room. Even the man who had doubted her the most stood speechless. "Impossible!" he whispered under his breath, shaking his head. Emily didn't smile. She knew she had done what she came to do. She had demonstrated skill, composure, and precision that could not be ignored. The atmosphere in the store had completely shifted. The mocking had vanished, replaced by respect and genuine admiration. People who had laughed at her now watched her closely, some even stepping forward to ask how she had learned to shoot so well. Emily lowered the rifle and glanced around the room. For the first time, she felt a small wave of validation. She had not just handled the firearm. She had taken the ridicule and turned it into an opportunity to show her competence. She had made the doubters pause, think, and reconsider their assumptions. But she also knew this was not the end of the story. There was still a higher challenge waiting, and she could feel it approaching. Something in the air told her that someone important was about to arrive, someone whose recognition would make this moment truly unforgettable. Despite her success, Emily remained humble. She didn't boast or gloat. She understood that respect earned through skill was far more powerful than trying to argue with words. Every eye in the room was on her, some in awe, some in disbelief, but all watching closely. She had captured their attention, and now she was ready for whatever came next. As she prepared for the next round, she felt a mix of excitement and anticipation. She had proven herself to many, but the story was far from over. There was still one moment that would solidify everything, the moment when someone with true authority would acknowledge her talent. And Emily, calm and focused as ever, knew she was ready for it. Her actions had already spoken volumes, but she could feel that the real recognition, the one that would silence all doubt, was about to arrive. The tension in the store had changed. It was no longer mockery or ridicule that filled the air. It was anticipation. People were waiting to see what would happen next. And Emily, steady and prepared, was ready to show them. The room was filled with a quiet tension. Emily had already proven herself more than anyone had expected, hitting targets that many assumed would be impossible for someone her age or experience. But she could feel the eyes of the skeptics still watching, some unwilling to admit defeat, others curious to see if her skill was real or just luck. One man, more arrogant than the rest, took a step closer. His chest puffed out as if to intimidate her. "All right, that was fine," he said, smirking. "But let's see how you handle something more challenging. I've been shooting for decades. Let's see if you can really keep up." Emily looked at him calmly, her heart steady. She had been waiting for a real challenge, one that would test her focus, her precision, and her patience all at once. This was it. She didn't flinch. Instead, she nodded slightly, silently accepting the unspoken challenge. The man gestured to the far end of the practice area. A series of small targets had been set up, spaced irregularly, each one requiring a slightly different angle and adjustment in aim. Some were low, some were high, some slightly tilted. Anyone inexperienced or overconfident could easily miss, and the man clearly believed she was both. He leaned back, crossing his arms, ready to laugh the moment she failed. Emily took a deep breath and approached the targets. She studied them carefully, analyzing the angles, the distance, and the position she would need to take. She adjusted her stance, planting her feet firmly, keeping her body balanced. Her hands were steady, her grip confident. Every motion was precise, a combination of skill and experience honed over weeks of practice and months of preparation. She raised the rifle slowly, blocking out the whispers and skeptical looks around her. The man who had been mocking her leaned forward, his smirk fading slightly as he watched her line up her first shot. Emily exhaled slowly, feeling a sense of calm determination wash over her. She wasn't shooting to prove him wrong anymore. She was shooting to prove to herself that she could handle the pressure. The first shot rang out, hitting a small target dead center. A hush fell over the room. A few people murmured quietly, clearly impressed. while others exchanged nervous glances. Emily didn't let it distract her. She moved to the next target, adjusted her aim, and fired again. Perfect. She continued, one target after another, each shot landing with precision. The man's smirk began to fade completely. He shifted his weight, clearly starting to realize that she was not just skilled, but focused in a way that intimidated even seasoned shooters. No way, he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. Emily ignored him. Words meant nothing. Only actions counted. As she approached the final target, the most difficult one, she could feel the weight of the challenge pressing down. It was smaller, placed at an awkward height, and slightly tilted. Even experienced shooters often missed it on their first try. Emily knew she had to be deliberate, every movement mattered. She adjusted her stance, focused her breathing, and aimed with unwavering attention. The crowd leaned in, silent now, watching her every move. The whispers had stopped. Even the usual chatter of the store seemed to fade into the background. This was no longer about mocking or judging. This was about witnessing someone performing at the edge of skill and composure. Emily exhaled, squeezed the trigger, and hit the target perfectly. A wave of surprise rippled through the room. The man who had doubted her most looked at her, eyes wide, speechless. Others began to murmur quietly, admitting under their breath that she had surpassed expectations. She didn't smile or celebrate outwardly. She had done this for herself, and that was enough. Some people approached cautiously, wanting to ask questions about her training and experience. Others simply watched silently, realizing they had underestimated her. Emily's calm, confident demeanor, combined with her skill, had shifted the energy in the room completely. The mocking and ridicule that had greeted her when she first walked in were gone. In their place was a sense of respect and even awe. But Emily sensed that something bigger was about to happen. She could feel a change in the atmosphere, as if the room itself was holding its breath. She had proven herself to many, yes, but she could sense that the real acknowledgement, the one that would truly solidify her achievement, was still coming. She didn't know exactly what would happen next, but she was ready. She had faced doubt, ridicule, and challenge, and she had emerged strong and unshaken. The tension in the store had transformed. What had started as a place full of skepticism and laughter had now become a stage for admiration and curiosity. Everyone who had been watching her earlier had shifted from mocking to quietly observing, trying to understand how she could maintain such composure under pressure. Emily knew that this moment was significant. She had not only demonstrated skill, but she had begun to change perceptions, showing that courage and ability were not defined by age or gender. As she lowered the rifle and stepped back, she felt a sense of calm satisfaction. She had handled the challenge perfectly, but she also knew that the most important part of the story, the part that would make people truly recognize her, was still ahead. Something in the air told her that a figure of authority, someone whose respect truly mattered, was about to enter. And when that person arrived, the entire atmosphere of the store would change again. For now, Emily simply stood there, composed and ready. She had turned ridicule into respect, doubt into attention, and mockery into curiosity. But she also knew that the final moment, the moment that would make the story unforgettable, was about to happen. The anticipation hung thick in the air, and Emily, calm and focused, was ready to face it. The store had fallen into an unusual quiet. The earlier murmurs of mockery had vanished, replaced by a tense anticipation that seemed to hang in the air like static. Emily had proven herself more than anyone expected. She had hit every target with precision, even the most difficult ones, and turned the skeptical crowd into a group of astonished onlookers. Yet, she could feel that the final recognition, the one that would truly validate her skill, was still missing. Just as she prepared for another round, the store door opened with a firm, deliberate push. A hush swept over the room immediately. Heads turned. All eyes followed the newcomer, a tall, commanding figure walking confidently through the entrance. His uniform was neat, his medals polished, and his presence alone demanded respect. He moved with the kind of authority that instantly silenced even the most confident of bystanders. Everyone instinctively straightened their posture, whispering in awe. It was a commander, someone known throughout the community for his leadership and expertise. His reputation preceded him. The room seemed to shrink under the weight of his presence. Emily felt a brief spike of nervous excitement, but it didn't shake her focus. She had faced mockery, doubt, and challenges already, and this was simply another moment to stay composed. The commander walked slowly through the store, his eyes scanning the room with quiet authority. He noticed the scattered targets and the various rifles, but his gaze quickly found Emily. She was standing calmly, holding her rifle, her posture steady, her expression composed. He paused for a moment, taking in her presence. There was something different about her. Something that suggested skill, confidence, and a quiet determination. Whispers ran through the room. "That's the commander," someone breathed. "He's the one who decides who's really skilled around here," another muttered. "If he acknowledges her, everyone will have to respect her." Emily felt the weight of the moment, but she remained poised. She had worked too hard, trained too long, and faced too much doubt to let nerves control her now. She lowered her rifle slightly in respect, aware that someone of this stature had entered the room. The commander's eyes stayed on her, as if measuring not just her skill, but her composure, her confidence, and her readiness to face a true test. For a few long seconds, there was silence. The commander's presence alone seemed to demand attention. The man who had mocked Emily earlier now looked uncomfortable, shifting uncomfortably on his feet. He had been confident before, certain that she was just a young woman out of her depth. But this was different. Now, a figure of authority, someone who commanded respect, was observing her. And he was looking closely. Then, unexpectedly, the commander nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly at first, as if acknowledging her focus and skill. Emily didn't move. She simply maintained her posture, ready to respond if needed. Slowly, the nod became a deliberate gesture of respect. Without words, he recognized her dedication, her precision, and her courage. The room seemed to exhale collectively, the tension lifting slightly as everyone realized what had just happened. The effect was immediate. Those who had doubted her moments ago looked at her with awe, some even lowering their heads in silent apology for their earlier mockery. People whispered among themselves, noting how unusual it was for the commander to acknowledge someone like her. "He's saluting her skill," one person murmured. "That's not something he does lightly." Emily felt a rush of quiet satisfaction. She had not sought the recognition, but she understood its significance. This was not just about proving herself to the skeptics in the room. It was about being seen and respected by someone who truly mattered in the world she cared about. Her training, her focus, and her courage had earned her this moment, and she received it with quiet humility. The commander continued to observe her briefly, his eyes scanning her stance, her posture, and the way she held the rifle. He gave another small, respectful nod before moving on, acknowledging her skill without words. Emily's heart swelled with pride, but she remained composed. She knew that humility was as important as skill. This was not a moment for boasting, it was a moment for quiet triumph. The store, which had been filled with doubt and ridicule just moments ago, was now alive with a sense of respect. The people who had laughed at her earlier now regarded her differently. They began to ask questions, wanting to understand how she had achieved such precision, how she had maintained such calm under pressure. Emily answered patiently, sharing her experience without arrogance, explaining her training, her focus, and the hours she had spent preparing. Even the man who had openly mocked her before now seemed humbled. He avoided eye contact, clearly processing what had just happened. The power of recognition from the commander had shifted everything. Emily had earned respect not through confrontation or argument, but through skill, composure, and quiet determination. For Emily, the moment was transformative. She had walked into a room full of doubt and left it with a sense of accomplishment and acknowledgement that would stay with her forever. The commander's salute had validated not just her ability with a rifle, but her courage to stand tall in the face of judgment and mockery. She realized that true respect was earned through action, not words, and that the recognition of someone who truly mattered was a reward unlike any other. As the commander exited the store, the atmosphere remained charged with the memory of his presence. The crowd, once skeptical, now regarded Emily with admiration. She had turned a moment of ridicule into a moment of triumph, and the acknowledgement of the commander ensured that no one would ever forget it. Emily took a deep breath, lowering her rifle completely, feeling a sense of calm satisfaction. She had faced challenge, doubt, and ridicule, and had emerged stronger, respected, and recognized. The day had begun with whispers of disbelief and mockery, but it ended with quiet triumph and the knowledge that her skill, focus, and courage could not be denied. The room had changed completely since Emily had first walked in. The mocking whispers and doubtful glances that had filled the air earlier were now replaced by an atmosphere of respect and curiosity. People were still murmuring quietly among themselves, talking about how unexpectedly skilled she had proven herself to be. But all attention shifted dramatically as the commander, who had entered the store moments before, now stepped closer, his presence commanding the room with quiet authority. Emily stood still, her posture calm and composed. She had faced skepticism, ridicule, and challenge before, but nothing compared to the intensity of being observed by someone of the commander's reputation. His eyes scanned her carefully, not just noticing her skill with the rifle but also her composure, her focus, and the confidence with which she had handled every challenge thrown at her. For a few long seconds, silence filled the store. The only sounds were the subtle shifting of people adjusting their weight and the faint hum of the overhead lights. The man who had doubted Emily the most earlier stood frozen, realizing that what had just happened was extraordinary. Even those who had quietly admired her skill were holding their breath, sensing that something remarkable was about to occur. Then, the commander paused directly in front of her. He regarded her carefully, almost as if weighing every aspect of her character, the determination in her eyes, the steadiness of her hands, the calm confidence in her stance. The room seemed to shrink around them, every observer aware that this was a defining moment. Without a word, the commander slowly raised his hand in a salute, a gesture that carried far more meaning than simple acknowledgement. It was a sign of deep respect, of recognition for skill, courage, and dedication. The salute struck Emily like a bolt of electricity. She stood perfectly still, absorbing the significance of the gesture. She had trained hard, faced ridicule, and proved herself through action rather than words. But to receive this level of respect from someone as authoritative as the commander was beyond anything she had imagined. She instinctively returned the salute, holding it with quiet dignity, aware that this moment was as much about honor as it was about skill. A ripple ran through the room. The spectators who had laughed at her earlier were stunned into silence. Some even muttered apologies under their breath, unable to reconcile the young woman they had mocked with the one now being formally recognized by a high-ranking commander. The air was thick with a mixture of astonishment and newfound respect. People began to whisper about how rare it was for the commander to give such a gesture, and how clearly he had seen something exceptional in Emily. Emily felt a surge of quiet pride. She had never sought recognition or validation from others, but this salute was different. It was not just a polite acknowledgement. It was a powerful statement. The commander, a person whose judgment was respected by everyone in the room, had recognized her skill and composure. That acknowledgement carried a weight that words could never match. The man who had openly mocked her earlier shifted uncomfortably. He had thought he understood the situation, assumed he knew her limits, and yet here she was, commanding respect from someone he revered. The dynamic of the room had completely changed. Emily, once underestimated and ridiculed, now stood as a figure of competence and courage. Every eye in the store was on her, some in admiration, others in disbelief, but all now watching her with renewed attention. The commander held the salute for a few moments longer, ensuring that his respect was unmistakably clear. Then he lowered his hand, nodding slightly, a gesture that reinforced the significance of the recognition. It was subtle, yet powerful, signaling that Emily had earned her place in a space that had initially doubted her. She remained calm, letting her actions speak louder than words, understanding that humility was as important as the skill that had earned her this moment. Around her, the atmosphere continued to shift. The people who had mocked her earlier now approached cautiously, curious to learn from her rather than criticize her. They asked questions about her training, her techniques, and how she had maintained such composure under pressure. Emily answered patiently, explaining the dedication and practice behind her skill. She did not boast or flaunt her abilities. She simply shared what she had learned, allowing others to see that respect is earned through consistent effort and determination. For Emily, the commander's salute was transformative. It validated not only her ability to handle a rifle with precision, but also her perseverance, her courage, and her determination to rise above judgment and ridicule. She realized that true recognition often comes from action rather than words, and that earning respect from someone whose opinion truly mattered was a rare and powerful reward. As the commander turned to leave, the room seemed to retain the energy of the moment. Emily lowered her rifle fully, feeling a sense of calm satisfaction. She had faced doubt, challenge, and ridicule, and she had emerged stronger, respected, and recognized in a way that no one could take away. Her journey through skepticism to validation had reached a pivotal point, one that would stay with her long after the echoes of this day faded. And in that moment, standing in the quiet after the commander's salute, Emily understood something vital. Skill, courage, and focus could break through prejudice, disbelief, and mockery. Actions, above all else, were what commanded respect, and she had shown the world that she was capable of achieving it. The moment the commander saluted Emily, the energy in the store shifted completely. The skeptical laughter, the whispers of doubt, and the mocking glances that had filled the air since she first walked in had vanished. In their place was a new atmosphere, one of quiet respect and awe. People who had once underestimated her now looked at her with genuine curiosity, some even whispering apologies under their breath for doubting her. Emily could feel the change around her, but she remained composed, knowing that her work here was not yet complete. The man who had mocked her the most earlier still stood nearby, looking embarrassed. His earlier confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by a hesitant acknowledgement that he had been wrong. He avoided direct eye contact, clearly unsure how to respond to the young woman he had assumed was inexperienced. Others in the store were more subtle, shifting in their seats or leaning forward to observe her more closely. No one dared challenge her anymore. The commander's salute had solidified her credibility in an instant. Emily lowered her rifle slowly, keeping her movements calm and deliberate. She didn't smile triumphantly or gloat. This was not about showing off. Her actions had already spoken louder than any words could, and now she needed to address the shift in attention around her. A few people began to ask questions, genuinely curious about her training, her techniques, and how she had managed to stay so focused under pressure. Emily welcomed their questions. She spoke patiently and confidently, explaining the hours of practice she had invested, the discipline she had maintained, and the lessons she had learned about patience and focus. Her explanations were simple but powerful. She talked about how she had trained herself to stay calm in tense situations, how she had visualized every shot, and how consistent practice built both skill and confidence. Those who had mocked her listened intently, realizing that her abilities were not simply natural talent, but the result of hard work and determination. Slowly, some of the doubters began to ask for advice, seeking tips on improving their own technique. Emily provided guidance humbly, showing them that she was not only skilled but also willing to help others grow. The man who had mocked her most finally spoke, his voice quieter than before. I didn't think someone like you could handle it," he admitted. "You've really shown me that I was wrong." Emily nodded politely, acknowledging his words without any hint of arrogance. She understood that people often judged others based on appearance or assumptions, and this was her opportunity to help them unlearn that habit. Other people in the store began to gather around her, no longer just as spectators but as learners. They asked questions about the rifles, about handling, and about technique. Emily explained everything clearly, emphasizing safety, patience, and precision. She showed them how to properly adjust their stance, how to focus their breathing, and how to approach each shot with calm determination. The room, which had once been filled with mockery and doubt, had transformed into a space of learning and respect. The transformation wasn't just among the skeptics. It was within Emily herself as well. She realized that proving her skill had been only part of the journey. The real impact came from changing minds and inspiring others. She saw the way people's attitudes were shifting in real time, how those who had doubted her were now listening carefully, and how respect could grow when actions spoke louder than assumptions. It was a lesson she would carry with her forever. Courage, focus, and dedication could change the way others saw you, and even inspire them to grow. By the time she stepped away from the counter, Emily had become the center of attention, not as a novelty, but as someone who had earned genuine respect. People who had laughed at her earlier now nodded appreciatively, some even approaching to thank her for sharing her knowledge. The energy in the store had changed completely. The room no longer buzzed with doubt and judgment. It was alive with curiosity, admiration, and the desire to learn from someone who had proven herself through action. Emily's calm demeanor and willingness to share what she knew turned what could have been a moment of conflict into a moment of inspiration. She showed that skill and dedication mattered more than gender, age, or appearance. Even the commander's salute, while a powerful symbol, was only part of the story. The true impact lay in how Emily used her knowledge, patience, and humility to transform the attitudes of everyone around her. In that moment, she understood something essential about respect. It wasn't something you demanded or argued for. It was something you earned through consistent action, humility, and the courage to rise above doubt. The people who had mocked her learned that lesson in real time, watching her perform, respond, and teach. Emily had become not only a skilled shooter but also a symbol of perseverance and quiet strength, showing that respect is built one deliberate action at a time. By the end of the day, Emily had turned the mockery she once faced into a story of inspiration. She had not only proven her skill but had also helped others see beyond assumptions and stereotypes. The room that had once doubted her now viewed her as a mentor, a leader, and a person worthy of admiration. The transformation was complete, and it had been achieved not through words, but through focus, skill, and courage. As she packed up her gear and prepared to leave the store, Emily felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond personal achievement. She had faced ridicule, doubt, and skepticism, and emerged not just respected, but admired. Her actions had changed minds, inspired others, and proven that true skill and determination cannot be ignored. The lesson she left behind was clear. Courage, preparation, and calm determination can turn doubt into respect, and mockery into admiration. By the time Emily began to gather her belongings, the atmosphere in the store had completely transformed. What had started as a place filled with doubt, mockery, and whispered assumptions was now charged with respect, curiosity, and admiration. Every person who had once questioned her abilities now looked at her differently. Some approached to ask questions, others simply nodded with quiet acknowledgement, and a few even expressed gratitude for the lesson she had unknowingly taught them. Emily felt a calm satisfaction, knowing that she had not only proven her skill, but had also changed the perceptions of everyone in the room. Her journey through the store that day had been more than just about handling firearms. It had been a test of patience, courage, and confidence. She had faced ridicule from those who assumed that her age, gender, and appearance meant she could not succeed. She had endured whispered doubts, sarcastic remarks, and overt challenges. And yet, she had not faltered. Each step she had taken, each precise shot she had made, and each calm, measured response she had offered had built a bridge from skepticism to respect. Even the man who had mocked her most openly now approached her cautiously. His voice was quiet, almost reluctant, as he admitted, "I misjudged you. I didn't think you could do it. You've shown me that I was wrong." Emily looked at him and nodded politely, acknowledging his words without arrogance. She knew that people often judge quickly, but she also understood that changing minds required more than confrontation. It required consistent action and patience. This moment, small as it seemed, was a victory not just for her skill but for her quiet resilience. Others who had previously whispered or laughed now engaged with her openly. They asked her about her training routines, her techniques, and how she maintained focus under pressure. Emily answered with patience and humility, sharing what she had learned about discipline, precision, and mental preparation. She emphasized the importance of practice, calmness, and determination, and how every challenge, no matter how daunting, could be overcome with the right mindset. People listened intently, taking in her words, realizing that the respect she had earned was the result of effort and dedication, not luck or privilege. The commander's presence earlier had already validated her skill in the eyes of everyone, but it was Emily's own actions that had solidified their respect. The salute she had received was a symbol, but it was the consistency of her focus, the precision of her shots, and her calm, humble demeanor that truly commanded admiration. She had turned every moment of doubt into an opportunity to demonstrate her competence and courage, and now the entire store recognized it. Emily felt a deep sense of pride, not in the approval she received, but in the journey she had undertaken. She had entered the store with determination and left having not only proven herself but also inspired others. Her presence had challenged assumptions, reshaped attitudes, and reminded everyone that skill and courage cannot be judged by appearances. The lesson was clear. Respect is earned through action, perseverance, and integrity, not by conforming to stereotypes or seeking validation. As she walked toward the door, the store felt different, almost as if the space itself had absorbed the shift she had brought. The people who had mocked her earlier now watched her with admiration, silently acknowledging that they had underestimated her. Emily held her head high, feeling the quiet triumph that comes from overcoming doubt and prejudice. She had done more than just handle a rifle with skill. She had transformed the way people saw her, and perhaps even themselves. The commander's salute, the recognition from the skeptics, and the curiosity of those who now wanted to learn from her combined into a moment of lasting significance. Emily knew that she had earned something rare, not only personal validation, but also the respect of others through her actions. She understood that moments like this were powerful because they proved a simple truth. True skill, courage, and composure cannot be ignored. As she stepped outside, the crisp air hit her face, and she felt a sense of calm satisfaction. She had faced every challenge the day had presented, from mockery to doubt to high expectations, and had emerged unshaken, skilled, and respected. The experience was more than a personal victory. It was a statement that determination, preparation, and courage could overcome prejudice and disbelief. Emily knew that this day would stay with her forever, not just as a story of skill, but as a story of resilience, humility, and quiet triumph. Walking away from the store, Emily reflected on what had happened. She had entered as someone underestimated, mocked, and doubted. She had left as someone recognized, respected, and admired. The journey had not been easy, but every challenge had strengthened her. Every doubt had fueled her determination, and every obstacle had prepared her for the moment of recognition. She realized that the true victory was not the approval she received but the confidence she had gained, the skills she had proven, and the minds she had changed. And so, Emily left the store that day with more than just the memory of hitting every target perfectly. She left with a renewed sense of self, a quiet pride in her accomplishments, and the knowledge that courage, skill, and perseverance could transform not only her own life, but also the perceptions of those around her. The story of the young woman who had been mocked at the gun store would be remembered not for the laughter she endured, but for the respect she earned, and the example she set for anyone who had ever been doubted.